Welcome to the SPSCC Art Creative Something. This is a special something in collaboration with the Olympia Artspace Alliance, featuring their storefront art in the storefront artists. And the first artists today are Susan Christian and John Corzine. And now I'm going to introduce Susan Christian, who is a painter, gallerist, among many other talents, a general extraordinaire. And John Corzine is a fine woodworker and jack of many trades. And I'm going to start with some questions for them. So I wanted to ask, how did you come up with the idea for your storefront installation?
I think that was my idea, and I don't know. I think I looked at how there was a very long series of windows, like there's a lot of horizontal space. And I didn't think I could do something unified. I thought it had to be something that would scatter and go like travel, and that would travel from, and it also goes around a corner. So I thought, well, there's nothing I can do that you can see from there's no angle you could see one whole unified thing from. So it would better be something that sort of repeats and shifts. And I thought, how about a school of fish? Because it's a seaport. But it's not a school of fish because there aren't any fish that are like each other, because I would have been bored. So that's how I came up with it.
That's amazing. And actually our very first something featured Susan and features seeing that work in the studio and hearing a little more about it as well. So I wanted to ask y'all both, what was the process of creating the work? So pre-installation, what were you doing in your studio or prospective studios?
I don't think John had to start as soon as I did, because until I got a bunch of fish made, but he helped me think about, he gave me a bunch of ideas. One of them was, how are we going to make it look more like they're in water? And I thought we should put a whole lot of blue horizontal sticks in there. And it was a little corny. I originally thought maybe they should go like this, like whoop, 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 whoop. And then I thought, that's just too dumb. And he said, no, they should not be horizontal. And I can't remember why, but when you see them installed, there's a lot of blue verticals just floating in there. And I don't know if it gives the illusion of water like in a cartoon, but it turns everything different from whatever's around it, and it's blue. And they're very beautiful to me, these little blue sticks, just like little blue lines everywhere. And also, John thought of, we were thinking about, stream beds and what happens in water, and where there's a floor, what are we going to do with the floor? And he said, well, what happens to the floor of stream beds? I'll let him tell you. And then we'll show you a picture of what we did.
The original idea of those horizontal sticks, Susan's sticks are all very kind of twisted and different sizes and everything. And I wanted to make them, because I'm a woodworker, I wanted to make them narrow and nice and all the same size. And just so that it was a uniform thing. And then they'd be thinner because they wouldn't take up as much space and block as much stuff. So that's where the vertical idea and how small they are came up. It's just a hint of whatever is in there. And the idea for the garbage and everything on the floor, we had intended, I think originally, as we went along, we were talking about different ideas, and we had thought, well, we have a school of fish that's coming through with no garbage on the floor, and then less fish with a little more garbage, and at the end, no fish and lots of garbage, and make it be a statement. But there was so much to do that we just couldn't get that far with it. So the garbage is kind of an afterthought, but it happens that if you go anywhere in a lake or out in the ocean, you're going to find crap on the floor. So you may as well put it there. And so we liked the idea of having the floor be decorated with something. So we threw some garbage and stuff in there. And Lynn and I, right before the pandemic shut off all the hotels down in the ocean, we went down and collected a bunch of stuff that was actually from the beach and brought it back. And that's what a lot of that stuff is. Just stuff we found in one weekend down at Ocean Shores area or Moclips area. And anyway, that's all I have to say about that. And then while Susan was making fish, I was building a grid on the ceiling above that hung off the ceiling so that we could hang all this stuff. And so while she was making fish, I was making the grid and getting ready for installation. And then things got delayed because of COVID. So we had a little extra time. So she made more fish and she made enough to fill up the whole space. And then she brought it in and we spent a couple of days hanging it all up. So that's how it went.
On the last day, right when we were all going downtown and meeting, I was looking at all the stuff that was going to go down and be on the floor that was trashy stuff. And I thought, you know, the floor is just black. It's a painted black floor. So I ran out and scooped up about 3 buckets of oyster shell. I live where there's a lot of oyster shell lying on the beach. So we threw them onto there too. And then Carl Smool, who works for the Olympia Artspace Alliance, did what I thought was a very beautiful job. And I don't have a beautiful photograph of it, but he did a beautiful job of making it lie on the floor in wave patterns so that it kind of makes more sense than it could have if I had just thrown it down there and not thought about it. This was pretty much a group design in many ways.
And we just, there was no pre-planned, where are we going to put this fish? It was like somebody got a fish ready.
Yes, there was.
And we'll like,
no, there wasn't.
No, I mean, not when we got there, because Susan's
Right.
Originally in her studio, she had the fish on walls and hanging up in her studio, but there was no way of doing it and repeating it in that space. So we kind of had to just say, well, these fish can kind of go together and these fish can kind of go together. And where are we going to put this one? It was kind of a from the hip kind of installation. And where we needed something right there. And we looked for a fish that looks like it wanted to be there. And so it's, we didn't stand there and plan it out 48 hours or anything. We just started doing it.
Winged it.
That kind of brings me to my next question, which you've already started answering, which was just what was that process like installing in the storefront? I think you are both probably used to working in galleries and installing. So how was the process in general, and how was it different, unique to being in a storefront?
Luckily, the temperature had gone up just enough so that we weren't freezing to death in there, because it was awfully cold during the winter. It's all concrete, unheated building. And, it was a lot of time on the ladder and trying not to have things fall down that you'd already hung up, and try not to snag yourself on things that were hanging by fish line. And Lucy and Carl, and there were like 3 or 4 volunteers that were tying up these fish as fast as they could. And I was estimating length of fish line for them. And, we just kind of, as they had one, do that one next, whatever, we just started putting them up. And it was grueling, really. I mean, it was a couple days of, I was glad to be done with it. Let's just say, when the last fish went up, it was nice to have it done.
Yeah.
It wasn't a festival experience, or anything like that. It was almost like a job kind of.
It's almost like work.
Almost like work.
Yeah.
Installation is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Hard, yeah. Susan, what was it like for you? So, I mean, you also were a gallerist.
Yeah, and I hadn't been out of my house because I'm old. So my stepson had shut me in like a invalid. So for me, it was fabulous to get the fuck out of there. So, excuse me, everybody. One point is that I had already put, oh no, I just put little, yeah, you're right. John had to do all this stuff with, it's like when the fish went from here, from my place to the storefront, I had little tiny loops made out of like invisible, what's that stuff called? Fish line.
Monofilament.
Yeah. And that was on each one, you know, it's like these tiny little nuts. But then John had to put another one of those on that to get it up to the ceiling, because I didn't know how long they were supposed to be, and they would have all been tangled. And so there was a lot of like very fiddly little stuff, and drilling tiny holes in each fish to put the fish line through. It was like, I felt like an elf alone in my studio. I just felt like an elf for a long time. So it was really fun to go in where there were 3 other people all talking and thinking and working and saying, wait a minute, what about we could put this one right there? And all my compositional stuff just went goodbye. But we made a composition as a group, and it was really, really fun. And I think we did a really good job with it.
And Susan spent a lot of time outside because we didn't want her in there with a bunch of people. So she was outside the windows, kind of directing traffic a little bit. And then we actually had a lunch, and we ordered pizzas and set up tables out on the sidewalk and drank a couple of beers and had some pizza. And that was fun, just to be unauthorized by the city to have a cafe on the sidewalk. But that was kind of fun.
Yeah, it was.
That sounds really amazing. It sounds like it went from being like in your studio, which again, if you go back to our first something, you get a front seat to that, to being this completely site-specific installation.
And a team. It was really, really fun, because everybody had good ideas. And I thought I knew exactly what I wanted to see, and that wasn't going to happen, because the space, I couldn't have predicted the feel of the space once we got in it. But I think it worked fine. And then there's the issue of reflections. And I don't know, storefronts are rough, because especially if you have a black background possibly, but it's been really interesting to look at it, because I thought when it was home and I just had a white wall, I thought, oh, this looks like the ocean for sure. But then when you look at it now, it's like there's cars in it. There are cars and trucks and other people in it walking around. So it's a very surreal image to my way of thinking now that it's up.
Should we look at some images?
Yeah, sure. So that's like, I made a lot of little baby miniature ones of the fish that I had. And this is about a third of this long piece that I had that was a tiny version of the correct proportions of the storefronts. And I really liked making these little baby fish, but of course nothing went where I thought it was going to go. But it was good for me to do it, to figure out, like, if you see that there's a group, it has the letters, the number 6 on it. It's like a lot of very tiny ones. And I thought, I'm going to make a couple of very tiny schools of fish that will travel together amid these big fish. And some of the big fish are obviously predatory, and that'll be fun. And none of that happened. But I made about 6 of these, and I had a wonderful time doing it. And they're rolled up in my junk drawer, So we could go on to there. Then when it started to get pretty was when I started to hang them up from the ceiling in the studio. And then they started to kind of live, because they moved, and I could see their relationships better in space. So I think, Nicole, there's one more image of them hanging up in there, maybe we could look at. And then over on the right, there's a very big one. I think it's 9 feet long. And I just thought, I have got to fill up some of this space. It's just going to be too repetitive if they're all the same size. And this is not my favorite fish, but it really did the job. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And next, there might be something. Oh yeah, and this is what I would make fish, and then I was putting them all up either from the ceiling or on the wall with a push pin or 2, and I would just make a whole lot, and then I'd go put them on the wall. So this is sort of like a fish market of all the fish that haven't yet been bought to go home and be eaten by somebody. And maybe, yeah, and I guess we could just go forward through this whole group. Nicole, this is Lucy and Carl. You'd never know because they have their masks on. They had to come out in Lucy's truck to get the very biggest fish because it wouldn't go in my car. So there they are, ready to go. Next, there's John on his ladder underneath the structure that he built. Anybody want to interrupt, please do. I mean, you know, you want to know where John got his boots, you know, whatever. Okay, and then if not, let's go on to the next one. And this is, then we start seeing, I went back in town when they were hung and trying to make pictures, and really the reflections are very, very prominent. And if I'd realized that they were going to be, I might have thought harder about making the fish look like they were in water, because they are, but there's no way to get out of the city either. So we're in the city, and here, and you can see these blue sticks hanging that I think really help them to stay in a space together and not just sort of disappear into blackness. And then also you can see down on the floor where Carl figured out that he should, I don't know if it really shows, but we've got various kinds of junk. There's a shoe sole and there's an old basket and some oyster shell, and Carl got down on the floor and shaped the spilled out oyster shell into waves, but which I thought was smart, but I don't know if you can really see it perfectly. So there's that. And then another one, please. And that's looking from the inside out. I think it looks great from the inside. And then another one. And now Lucy and I went over there like a week ago, and this was really smart. She figured out that if you put the camera flat up against the window, you don't get any reflections. So these are much nicer pictures of what it looks like to be looking at them if your brain will take away the traffic. And then I think there's maybe a couple, three more of these, just so that you can see the fish in the sticks just swimming around. And that is them looking out from the inside. And I think that might be it. It is. Okay.
So my last question, I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll see if our audience has any questions, was just that, what do you hope that the audience will get from the work? It's in a really unique place. It's super public. It's not your traditional gallery space. So how do you hope the audience will be affected?
I hope they'll just have a nice time. We're having COVID, and I had been shut in since the end of February. So for me to go downtown was a big deal. And it was very, very changed. There was nobody on the street. There were cars, but there weren't people walking around because you don't want to bump up against anybody too much. And so what I hope is that to the extent that people are downtown, there's something pretty down there. Just like cheer up, you know, that life goes on. That's about it. I mean, it wasn't very philosophical.
I'm surprised that nobody's broken the windows, and maybe it's because they think, well, that looks so nice. We don't want, even the anarchists, they can't say that's a corporate thing or whatever.
Oh,
so, you know, it hasn't been hit, and that's a good thing. So, I don't know. There was a couple of protests when I was working down there that came by, and that was interesting to be working in there and to see a Black Lives Matter protest group come by and go, and it was like watching TV because I was inside the building, and it was pretty cool to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I have noticed that there's been, you know, such respect for all of the local art, all of the murals and stuff. And even a lot of the political graffiti has been on plywood, which I think is pretty amazing. And I love that y'all's installation is adding to our very unusual, based on our unique circumstances, landscape downtown. Any questions from the audience?
So, John and Susan, are there some things that you wish you had known before you got started with this? Other than we'd be in a pandemic economic shutdown, but besides that, anything about the project or the building, that you kind of wish you'd known?
I wish I had understood about the reflections. I don't know why. Well, no, I do know why I didn't know. It's because the previous installations in that window have been paper flat up against the glass, which worked really well. I mean, it's like spatially, with a black background, you're going to see everything. That's going to be a mirror. So I totally didn't anticipate it. And when we got in there, I thought, oh, geez, what am I going to do? And there wasn't anything to do. But I think it's very pretty. I think it's really pretty anyway. But it is, if I had known about it, I might have designed something that would have incorporated the traffic and the buildings. But it never occurred to me. Because, so give me another chance. I'll do something really cool. Yeah.
And I didn't really, from the first time I went in there, I knew it was just going to be a kind of a dirty building to work in. And I'm just used to just taking what I've got and going with it. So nothing really surprised me. It was, sitting empty for so long, all the pipes up above, every time you touch something, dust and old insulation would fall down and that kind of thing. So it was a little, when the lights come on, you could see all the dust in the air when you're in there, if you're being active. And so I was kind of glad we all had to wear masks anyway, because there's so much, who knows what's in that dust floating around. So luckily I'm 60, and by the time I get cancer from whatever else is in the air, I'll be dead anyway, so that'll be okay.
Any other questions for our creatives?
John, you mentioned the lighting. What kind of lighting?
We only had one plug that we could. There's no lighting on the piece right now, and Lucy had thought about putting pucks of LED lights around.
Yeah.
But I had some work lights in there that I could use to see what I was doing up above in the ceiling area.
I see.
Yeah.
And the depth from the window to the back wall was how many feet? Was that about 6 feet?
It's 8 feet from the curtain to the window in the middle, and it's 4 feet on the wings. So it comes in 4 feet from each side and then opens up to as much as 8 feet from the very corner of the building back to the curtain.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it was brave of you and Susan to attempt the dimensional aspect of it, as opposed to just, somebody could have just put a sheet of paper against the window and made a bunch of fish. But it became so much more interesting, I think, with the blue water hanging down and the interplay of the fish. The fish are not painted on both sides, are they? Do they move at all?
They would if there were anything happening in the building. They just sway a little bit, but each one is suspended from 2 wires.
Yeah.
So they don't flip around. I didn't want them to flip around because the
And
back sides are just black.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they have lumber on the back to hold them together. They're not to be seen.
Yeah.
We are going to install lighting, unfortunately not in time to benefit
Thanks
this.
a lot, Chris.
I know. You just convinced us how needy it is, but
I thought you were my friend.
I know. Well, you'll just have to come back, right?
Hey.
So yeah, as soon as this work comes down, we got funding from the Downtown Alliance in the city to put lighting up. And Lucy, I know, just connected. We're working with the electrician to figure out where and how to put some electrical outlets too, because my hope is that the reflection issue is a little less if the artwork is actually lighted. But I went by there at about 3 this afternoon, and already this time of year, those windows are dark in the afternoon. So it's only going to get darker as the seasons change. So that'll get a little bit better.
Well, would you guys collaborate on another project in the future? Do you have anything in the wings?
Oh, me and John?
Yeah, you and John. I think you guys made a good team.
Huh. Well, we could think
In
about
the
it.
next storefront
Yeah.
application.
Susan wants to do
Okay.
something, I'll be there to help her with it, I suppose.
Well,
Yeah.
I do have a project. I hope you're done with your house in Seattle because I have a project in the wings I could use your help on.
Okay.
Okay.
Don't we all? Nobody can do anything without John. It's just, he's like Jesus.
Yeah.
I'm not done yet, but I'll hopefully by election day. I still won't be done by election day, so hopefully that goes all right for the country.
So thank you all. Yeah, thank you so much, Susan and John, for sharing with us today. Thank you to the Artspace Alliance and for partnering for these special somethings, and thank you all for coming.